or what is God to you? My perception of God has changed over the years. My parents have always gone to church, and I remember my father being very active in the church, and many times he had a leadership position in music ministry generally. When I was young, about 5 years old, I thought God lived in the clouds somewhere in outer space. In church, we repeated words that I could not understand. They didn't have no meaning at all. When I was 7, I remember going outside, kneeling down to pray to God, who again lives somewhere in the clouds. I looked up into the sky and I said my own words, believing that God would hear me. Well, I have to confess, my first prayer was not very spiritual. See, a man had lost some money, and he said he would give a quarter to whoever found it. So my first prayer was asking God to show me where the money was. I didn't find it. But you know, that started me talking to God and praying to God. And somehow praying outside seemed to be even more real than being in the church and saying repetitive words again and again. Now, I have to stop for just a minute, and I have to explain something to you about my past here. In church, we referred to God as He. So I started to accept that, and I never did question it whatsoever. God was male, as far as I knew. But I know now God is not a he and God is not a she. But the habit of calling God he has been kind of hard to break. It wasn't until I was in seminary that I hadn't experienced something with other than he. I said he, and a girl in my class raised her hand and said, "We're supposed to use inclusive language." I was embarrassed. I had no idea what she was talking about. I went home and researched that to try to figure out what it meant. Well, I spend most of my time, I've said he, and I've been trying really hard to stop that habit. And if I fail, and I know I will, I ask for your understanding, grace, and forgiveness. I am working on this. But, you know, when you've grown up with that so many years, it's hard to change that. So I just wanted to explain that first off. Now, you know, as I grew up understanding aspects of God, my idea of God changed when I was in grade school. All of a sudden, God became a demanding God. I believed I had to do certain kinds of things to please God, and I felt guilty if I didn't live up to the standards that I'd set for myself. Now, these were expectations that I had of myself that I thought God had for me. It wasn't what I was really reading in the scriptures. But when I was in junior high school, I started to learning about another aspect of God as I read the Bible even more so. I discovered that obeying rules was not the entirety of what Christianity was about. I discovered a compassionate God, not a demanding God, not a God that lived in the clouds in outer space somewhere, but a compassionate God. Rigid rules leave no room for expansion of understanding of love. God wants a heart-based relationship that expresses itself in active compassion to God and others. This is like the woman that I'm going to tell you about a little later in the second story. Knowledge is essential, but one's life shouldn't be stopped on just acquiring knowledge. And in the two stories we'll be talking about today, you're going to see that knowledge was really, really important. But one group of people stopped there. Each of these two stories are worthy of separate sermons. And although people like to separate them, I'm going to present them together as two different concepts of how people look at God and look at scriptures and approach Jesus. We will see how they're different people, how they interacted with Jesus, and how he responded. The first story is a group of trained religious scholars. They knew a lot about God, but they didn't know God. They knew the specifics of the law, but their understanding of the scriptures was shallow and reflected true insight. Their accumulation of religious knowledge was extensive, and they didn't hesitate to brag about their superiority to the public. Their righteousness stemmed from them keeping all 613 laws of God perfectly. They knew the ritual laws, and when they saw that Jesus' disciple breaking those laws, they told Jesus they are unclean. Well, Jesus corrects the Pharisees by actually talking to the crowd and explaining. Ritual washing doesn't make a person truly clean. The ugliness and the evil that exists in the world is not a result of physical uncleanness. Unwashed hands have nothing to do with the person's cleanliness. It's all about the cleanliness of the mind, not washing of hands. All actions begin in the mind, so be careful what you put in your mind. One needs to have a clean mind and have clean thoughts. You know, when I was a child in Sunday school, we had a little song that we used to sing, and I think you probably know it. It was called, "Oh, Be Careful, Little Eyes." And I'll just sing it to you really quick. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. For the Father up above is looking down in love. And be careful, little eyes, what you see. And then it also talks about ears that you hear, tongues, what you say, hands, what you do, feet, where you go, mind, what you think, and heart, whom you trust. Everything begins with the thought, and that thought will grow. So be careful how you treat it. There's a story I'm going to tell you about a grandfather who is trying to teach his grandson about the thoughts of the mind. And here's the story. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves that are inside all of us. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other wolf is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about this for a minute, and then he asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." So I ask you, what are you feeding your mind? How do you absorb your day? What do you do? There's all kinds of things that capture our attention. What are you reading? What do you see on your computers or your cell phones? What kind of books and magazines do you read? You know, TV have commercials, and they're very useful. Companies actually study how to best influence you. Now, I have a couple of little jingles that the TV has said over the years, and let's see if you can figure out what product they're trying to promote. Okay, here's one. Like a good neighbor. What is it? What is the rest of it?
State Farm is there.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's right. Okay, State Farm. Okay, there's a fast food establishment that says, "I'm loving it." Does anyone know what that one is?
Fried chicken.
McDonald's. Here's one. What company made a fortune with the slogan, "Just do it"? Man, family, come on.
Nike.
Nike.
Nike, you got it. Okay. Okay, last one here. Okay. Some of you, this is a while back, Some of you remember a commercial where there was a little old lady who was looking at her hamburger and she said, "Where's the what?
Wendy's.
Beef, Wendy's.
Where's the beef?" That's right. And do you remember what company was sponsoring this?
Wendy's.
Wendy's, that's right. Okay, that's good. So you can see that commercials can get inside your head. There's another little quip that I've heard, and it's called GIGO, G-I-G-O. Have you heard that before? Do you know what it stands for? GIGO, G-I-G-O. Anybody want to try?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Who said that?
Dennis.
You are right. Garbage in, garbage out. You see, you can fill your mind with whatever you want, but remember, whatever goes in, it stays there and comes out the same way. And sometimes you're not even aware of it, like these jingles. And Jesus reminds his followers that evil first comes from the mind, but the reverse is also true. So I ask you again, what are you feeding into your mind? You can take control of feeding your mind. And I challenge you to fill your mind with good, clean thoughts. These are things that God has to offer. Now, Jesus did not like the Pharisees. He thought the Pharisees were too judgmental, and he told this story to illustrate that point. He thought the Pharisees were show-offs by pointing out their devout lifestyle and haughty attitude. Jesus had an example of a particular Pharisee and a tax collector who went to the temple. Now, the story is found in Luke 18, and I'll read it to you. A Pharisee and a tax collector both went to the temple to pray. The Pharisee stood alone and prayed, "God, I thank you that I'm not like other people who steal, cheat, or take part in adultery, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give 1/10 of everything I get." They prided themselves on all kinds of details of the law. People were impressed with their piety, but Jesus saw right through them and recognized them for who they truly were. Now, the rest of the story goes like this. The tax collector was standing off in a distance. He would not even look up to heaven. He beat his chest, and because he was so sad, he said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." I tell you, Jesus said, when this man went home, he was right with God, but the Pharisee was not. Here you can see there are two men. They had two different kinds of prayers, two different attitudes, and the verdict on these two were totally different. The Pharisee believed his piety was acceptable to God, but Jesus declared the humble tax collector, that was the person who had a right standing with God. Now, our story in Matthew, Jesus is even more direct and directed the self-righteousness of the Pharisees. He was very harsh with them. And this kind of bothered the disciples. And in fact, they said, "Do you know the Pharisees are angry because of what you said?" Jesus, as I said before, they were hypocrites. They violated their own laws. And then he quoted a verse from Isaiah that really got him angry. This is found in Isaiah 29. It says, "These people show honor to me with words, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is worthless. The things they teach are nothing but human rules." No wonder the disciples were concerned. Those are sharp words. Those are fighting words. They challenged the righteousness of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the most educated men of their day, yet their education is not a guarantee of God's approval. Sincerity of heart, that's what's of value to God. The Pharisees are full of proper words, but their hearts were empty of devotion. In order to stand in a right relationship to God, one must have more than proper good words. Right attitudes are crucial in true worship. What is your attitude when you come to worship? The Pharisee, he was proud, and the tax collector was humble. You know, I've been to churches where it seemed that fellowship was far more important than worshiping God. They spent a lot of time doing that. We should worship God in spirit and in truth. The Pharisees approached Jesus with the air of superiority and judgment. Jesus' advice to his disciples was to ignore them. The Pharisees had nothing of value worth listening. In fact, they were blind to God's truth. He said it was a case of the blind leading the blind. Disaster and doom will be their final end. They'll end up in a ditch. Jesus went so far as to insinuate they weren't planted by God and would be yanked out. Does this mean God will reject them? The Pharisees were hypocrites who twisted the law to suit their own ideas. They truly didn't understand the depth. They were more preoccupied with following details, and they never tired of making new laws. They missed the point. Rituals had replaced devotion. There was a French mathematician and philosopher, Blaise Pascal, who lived in 1623 to 1662. And he said this: there are two kinds of people, the righteous who think they are sinners, and the sinners who think they are righteous. That's what we have in this story. The righteous who think they are sinners, and the sinners who think they are righteous. Now, our second story is about a non-Canaanite, a non-Jewish Canaanite woman. You can see here I have a map, and this has helped to clarify who were the Canaanites. Sometimes people say, I don't know, I've heard the term, but I just don't know anything about them. Well, this has to do with the land of Canaan, and the people who lived there were called Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, and all kinds of other ites. And they were living in what was the promised land. In the Old Testament, Joshua was told to go into the promised land and subdue all the people there and set up, Israel. Unfortunately, the Israelites did not do this, and the Canaanites became a thorn in their flesh. Just read Judges or Kings or Samuel or whatever. It was a problem. And thus the Jews hated the Canaanites. Well, this woman is a descent of the Canaanites from the area of Tyre and Sidon. You can see it there where it is. Now, the whole area of Canaan incorporated far more than what you see here. It encompasses Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, Jordan, and the southern portions of Syria and Lebanon. Let's go on with the story of the Canaanite woman. She is presented in stark contrast to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Again, the Pharisees and teachers are supposed to be the best of the best in religious matters. They were all Jew in every way possible. They were everything the woman wasn't. And when the woman came to Jesus asking for help with her demon-possessed daughter, Jesus ignored her. Remember, Jews did not like non-Jews and regard them with disdain. She was a Canaanite and had no right to expect Jesus would hear her. But she had to try. Jesus' reputation was well known, and she was desperate. The disciples were annoyed, and they asked Jesus to tell her go away. They had no compassion for the woman or sensitivity to her needs. It is possible to be so occupied with spiritual matters that we miss the real needs that are around us. And this is especially true for people who inconvenience us. Don't shut out those who are different from us. We want to be aware of something beyond our spiritual focus. We need to look beyond this. Now, the woman, she could not be ignored. She was told, go away, but she persisted. Help me, she cried. And Jesus, he couldn't ignore that request. Jesus can and never will ignore an earnest cry for help. His answer may not be what we expect, but be assured, he will hear us. Jeremiah 29:12-13 says this, then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me, and when you seek me with all of your heart. And in Hebrews 13:18 it says this, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's great comfort. Now, Jesus said his mission in response to this lady, when listening to her, he says, I am called to minister to the Jews. I'm called to be a minister to the lost sheep of Israel. Lost sheep of Israel? Well, she didn't qualify. Canaanite? No. Lost sheep? No. Jesus' response may seem a little calloused and unfeeling. Was he testing the woman, or was he testing the disciples? He said it was not right to give the children's bread to the dogs. Now, the word dogs here, it may sound like it's really mean. Was he calling her a dog? You know, calling people names just doesn't sound very typical of what Jesus would do. But in that day, Gentiles, non-Jews, were called dogs. That's just how they referred to them. So in this one, we read it from that point of view, we can understand he's just making a reference to who she was in relation to the sheep of his pasture. Her response to this comment was, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. In her heart, she believed that God would heal. She had a heart that was tender towards God. And Jesus, he was supposed to go to the sheep of Israel. So who was she? If she is being healed, her daughter being healed, well, does that make her a Jew? I mean, if Jesus is only for the lost sheep of Israel, he's responding to somebody else. This should not have happened. As a Gentile, a Canaanite, a non-Jew, she should have been on the fringes, never be listened to. But this encounter with the Canaanite woman was cross-cultural, cross-religious, cross-intellectual, and cross-racial. She was different. You know, outer appearances are important, but God is more concerned with the inner person here. Jesus gives his disciples some insight in how he treats this lady. Jesus rejected the pious Pharisees, but the tax collector and his humble attitude he accepted. The woman who was humble, he accepted. But the pious people who should have known better, he rejected. I have some questions I want to ask you in conclusion. What do you like inside? Are rules the basis of how you judge everything? Rules are good, but if it's the only thing inside, perhaps you need to reevaluate that. So, what do you like inside? Next, what are you feeding your mind? Are you feeding your mind with clean thoughts? Next, do your attitudes show a heart that is truly humble? For this is the basis of what Jesus accepted in the woman, her attitude, in the tax collector story that he told. Humbleness is an important factor in coming to God. And the last question I have is this: does your compassion reach across cultural, religious, intellectual, and racial differences? Our compassion, our love for God has to be more than this. We need to be like Jesus. He crossed over into areas that people didn't do. So we need to be like Jesus, reach past cultural differences, past religious differences, past intellectual distances, and past racial differences. In the future, I will be talking more about racial differences, but I want you to examine these things this week. Thank you.